Human lost his gloves saving the alien girl, but her people claimed his frozen hands as tribute. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Commander Jason Wood stood in the heart of the storm, his breath coming out in visible puffs as the harsh winds whipped through the icy landscape. His face, still covered in the remnants of snow, held a hardened expression, but his mind was far from calm. The blizzard had been fierce, and every step was a struggle against nature's fury. Yet there he stood, unwavering, his military-grade jacket providing little relief against the freezing cold that threatened to paralyze him with each passing second. He had one mission, to rescue the alien girl, stranded in the blinding white of the tundra. He had barely made it out of the transport shuttle before he saw her, collapsed under a pile of snow, barely conscious. Without hesitation, he rushed toward her, his gloved hands reaching for her, lifting her into his arms. His boots dug into the snow, leaving tracks behind as he carried her to safety. But as he made his way back, the brutal cold set in faster, and his fingers grew numb. He was losing feeling in his hands, but he didn't care. All that mattered was that she survived. The girl was alien, no doubt. Tall and slim, her silver skin glimmering under the faint sunlight that broke through the clouds, her eyes were wide with confusion and fear. "Why would you help me?" she asked weakly, her voice shaking as she tried to look up at him. Jason didn't answer right away. Instead, he simply cradled her in his arms, his face set in determination. Her people were known to be fiercely independent, proud, and at times, hostile toward outsiders. But Jason wasn't like the others. He wasn't here for politics or conquest. He was here because, simply put, she needed him. "Don't worry about it," he finally muttered. "You're safe. Now." The girl closed her eyes, but before she could speak again, she lost consciousness. Jason fought through the exhaustion and numbness creeping up his body. His mission wasn't over. He had to get her back to the shuttle, where medical supplies could stabilize her. But it was clear his hands, the ones that had gripped her so tightly, were beyond saving. His gloves had long since frozen to his skin, and now his bare hands were raw with frostbite. When they finally reached the safety of the shuttle, Jason gently laid her on the medical bed, his breath ragged as he tried to regain control of his shivering body. He could barely move his fingers, but somehow, he managed to get her stabilized. However, just as he was catching his breath, a communication screen buzzed to life, showing the alien woman's people. They were watching him, their faces unreadable. "You've touched her," a voice from the screen echoed. "You've saved her life. For that, you must be rewarded." Jason raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this conversation was going. "I didn't do it for a reward," he replied, his voice hoarse. The alien leader on the screen simply nodded. "We claim your frozen hands as tribute. They belong to us now, as a token of your sacrifice." Jason looked down at his hands, the frost still clinging to his skin, and for a moment, he considered protesting. But in the end, he said nothing. He had saved her life, and that was all that mattered. The rest was just a strange consequence of his duty. "Take them," he muttered, the cold settling into his bones. "But you'll owe me one." He leaned back, exhausted, knowing that the alien people would now see him in a new light, whether he wanted them to or not. Jason's body ached from the cold as he sat in the small, dimly lit shuttle. The alien girl, still unconscious, lay on the bed nearby, hooked up to the basic medical equipment that could help her recover. His hands were now wrapped in makeshift bandages, each movement sending sharp pains through his numb fingers. The frostbite had taken its toll, but he didn't mind. He hadn't hesitated when it came to saving her. She was important. Jason had no idea why, but something about her, the way her people had reacted, told him she was more than just another alien. Her survival meant something far beyond what he could comprehend. The shuttle's humming engine seemed to whisper in the silence of the room, a stark contrast to the storm that had raged outside just hours before. The wind had been relentless, yet Jason had pushed forward, driven by a sense of duty that had no explanation. His mind drifted back to the moment when the alien tribe had demanded his frozen hands as tribute. He hadn't expected that. It wasn't the way things worked on Earth, and it felt foreign to him. But then again, this was no ordinary rescue. He had saved a life, and in their eyes, that was worth something far more valuable than any personal sacrifice. It was a gesture that spoke to something ancient, something embedded deep in the fabric of their culture. The people of her tribe had seen his sacrifice, and it meant everything to them. He had been granted a kind of honor in their eyes. But the idea of them keeping his hands was unsettling. Still, Jason knew it was part of the cost. As the shuttle's lights flickered slightly, Jason's gaze returned to the girl. She looked fragile, yet there was a quiet strength in the way she lay there. He had been trained to observe, to analyze his surroundings, but something about her made it difficult for him to focus. Her alien features, with their shimmering silver skin and delicate features, held a kind of beauty he had never seen before. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but he felt an unexpected pull toward her. He shook his head, focusing on the task at hand. She would wake up soon, and he needed to be prepared for whatever came next. The tribal leaders had promised him nothing in return for his sacrifice, except for the strange claim on his frozen hands. That alone was enough to make him feel uneasy. What did it mean? And why had they chosen him, a human, to offer such an important tribute? Jason's thoughts were interrupted by a soft groan from the bed. The girl was stirring. Her silver eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, her gaze met his. There was a flash of confusion, followed by an almost imperceptible glint of recognition. She didn't speak right away, but Jason could see the wheels turning in her mind as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. "You're safe," Jason said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "You're in the shuttle. You're not going to die." She blinked a few times, slowly processing his words. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice weak but steady. Jason gave a small smile, though it didn't reach his tired eyes. "I'm just a guy who did what anyone would do." She shook her head slightly, her confusion deepening. "Why would you save me? I'm nothing to you." Jason looked at her, his brow furrowing. "Everyone deserves a chance," he said simply. "I wasn't about to leave you to die out there." She seemed to consider this for a moment before her expression softened slightly. "I don't know if I can repay you for this." Jason leaned back in his chair, his hands still throbbing, but the ache wasn't as strong as it had been moments ago. He knew that whatever happened next would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could fully understand. The alien girl had a power he didn't know about, and he was about to be dragged into something far bigger than either of them had ever imagined. He could feel it in his bones, their destinies were now intertwined, and there would be no turning back. The girl's eyes fluttered open again, her gaze locking onto Jason. The soft hum of the shuttle's life support system was the only sound that filled the room, a stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind on the icy surface. Her silver eyes were clearer now, though still clouded with confusion. Jason watched her carefully, waiting for any sign of recognition, but she said nothing. Her body was still too weak, her movements slow and deliberate. He could feel the tension in the air as she shifted slightly, her face drawn in a mix of pain and uncertainty. "You're safe here," Jason said, his voice steady. "You're not in danger anymore." The girl slowly nodded, though her gaze still wandered, as if she was searching for answers that she didn't yet have. Her hand trembled as it reached up to touch her head, brushing against the smooth, silver strands of her hair. The alien's skin shimmered under the shuttle's low lights, a delicate iridescence that Jason had never seen before. She was different from anything he had ever encountered, yet there was a certain fragility about her that drew him in. "What's your name?" Jason asked, his tone softer this time, more personal. She looked at him for a moment before replying, her voice still weak but growing stronger. "Lyra," she said, her accent unfamiliar, yet her words were clear. "Lyra," Jason repeated, testing the name on his tongue. It sounded almost melodic, fitting for someone as enigmatic as she appeared. "I'm Jason. Just Jason." The simplicity of his introduction felt almost absurd in contrast to the situation, but it was enough. The alien girl, Lyra, seemed to consider this for a moment before speaking again. "Why did you save me?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost as if she were afraid of the answer herself. Jason hesitated for a moment. There were 100 answers he could give, but none of them felt right. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally, his voice steady. "No one should die out there. Not like that." He looked at his hands, still aching, wrapped in bandages. The frostbite was severe, but he could deal with that. What mattered was that she was alive. Lyra's gaze softened, and for a moment, there was something in her eyes that almost resembled gratitude. But it was fleeting, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "You didn't know who I was," she said, almost to herself, her voice full of quiet realization. "No, I didn't," Jason replied. "But that doesn't matter. You're alive now, and that's all that matters." Lyra shifted again, her movements a bit stronger this time, though still labored. She seemed to be weighing her next words carefully. "I am the daughter of the sovereign of my people," she said, her voice low but clear. "You saved the heir to the throne." Jason's heart skipped a beat at her words. This was bigger than he had realized. He hadn't just saved anyone, he had saved someone of unimaginable importance. A princess. His mind raced, trying to process the implications. "I didn't know," Jason said slowly, trying to keep his thoughts straight. "I had no idea." Lyra nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But now you do." There was a long silence between them, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. Jason wasn't sure what to say next. All he had wanted to do was save her, to do the right thing, and now, here they were. He had no idea what he was supposed to do next. But one thing was certain, he couldn't walk away from this. Not now. Not after everything. Lyra turned her head toward the small window of the shuttle, her gaze distant. "What happens now?" she asked softly, almost to herself. Jason stared out the same window, his mind working through the options, none of them easy. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But we'll figure it out. Together." Lyra looked at him then, her eyes searching his face. There was a flicker of something, perhaps trust, perhaps uncertainty, but Jason was certain of one thing. They were in this together, whether either of them was ready for it or not. As the days passed, Jason found himself growing accustomed to the strange new reality he had been thrust into. The shuttle became his temporary home, a small, floating refuge amidst the vastness of space. Lyra's recovery was slow but steady. She spent her days resting, while Jason did his best to keep the shuttle running smoothly. Despite the ongoing tension between them, there was an unspoken understanding that hung in the air. They were in this together now, bound by circumstances neither of them had anticipated. Jason often found himself staring out the shuttle's small porthole, his mind drifting back to Earth, to everything he had left behind. The planet seemed so far away now, a distant memory that was quickly fading. In its place, a new world was beginning to take shape, one that was completely foreign to him. He didn't know where this journey would lead, but he knew he couldn't turn back. Lyra, too, seemed to be adjusting to the uncertainty of their situation. She had begun speaking more openly, though there were still moments when she seemed distant, lost in thoughts of her own people. Jason couldn't blame her. She was the heir to a powerful alien throne, and yet here she was, stranded on a shuttle with a human who had no idea how to help her return home. But even so, she seemed to trust him, something that Jason couldn't quite explain. They had formed a bond in those early moments of her rescue, and it had only grown stronger since then. One evening, as they sat together, Jason noticed Lyra staring at the stars outside the shuttle. There was a deep sadness in her gaze, one that spoke of a life she had left behind. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Lyra," he said, his voice low. "What's going to happen now? Your people, they want my hands. What does that mean for us?" She looked at him then, her eyes softening as she considered his question. "The tribute," she began slowly, "it is a symbol of honor in my culture. To give something so personal, so precious, is a gesture that shows respect for what you've done. Jason frowned. But why me? Why did they choose me? Lyra paused, her gaze drifting back to the stars. Because you saved me, she said simply. And in doing so, you've proven yourself to be someone who understands sacrifice. My people value that above all else. Jason wasn't sure what to make of her words. Sacrifice? He hadn't done it for recognition. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. And yet, in her eyes, it seemed to mean something much more. He sighed, rubbing his hands together. The frostbite still stung, though the pain had dulled over time. I didn't think it would lead to this, he muttered. I didn't think saving you would turn into this whole thing. Lyra looked at him, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. None of us ever expect what happens next, she said. But it's not too late. You can still change the course of things. We can both change what's to come. Jason looked at her, unsure of how to respond. She was right, in a way. Everything had changed the moment he had stepped out into the storm to save her. But what now? What came next for them? For him? Lyra's voice interrupted his thoughts. You may not know it yet, Jason, but you are now part of something much bigger than either of us. And the choices we make from here on will determine the future for both of us. The weight of her words hung in the air, and Jason found himself staring at her, trying to understand just what that future might look like. All he knew was that it was uncertain. It was risky. And yet, he felt an undeniable pull toward it. For the first time in a long while, Jason realized he didn't have all the answers. But maybe, just maybe, that was okay. As long as they faced it together. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Jason and Lyra spent their time on the shuttle, confined to a small space as they drifted through the cold vastness of space. They exchanged stories of their worlds, though the conversation was often quiet, as if they were both waiting for something, though neither knew what it was. The shuttle's engines hummed softly, and Jason found himself becoming more accustomed to the strange rhythm of their new life. Lyra, despite her royal bloodline and mysterious past, seemed to grow more comfortable around him. The icy distance between them began to thaw, though there were still moments of hesitation. Jason would catch her gazing out the window, lost in thought, and he would give her space, understanding that her mind was often far away. She had a duty, one that she could not yet face. As for Jason, he was still processing what it all meant. Saving Lyra had been instinctive, but the consequences of that action were unfolding in ways he hadn't expected. Her people, the ones who had claimed his frozen hands as a tribute, were now his responsibility in some way, whether he liked it or not. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was entangled in something far bigger, something beyond his comprehension. Lyra's people were watching, and Jason had no idea what they expected from him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of a precipice, and he wasn't sure which direction to step. One morning, as the shuttle drifted through a quiet stretch of space, Lyra approached him, her movements deliberate, her eyes meeting his with a seriousness that he hadn't seen before. Jason, she said softly, her voice steady but carrying a weight that made him pause. I need to ask you something. Jason turned to face her, his brow furrowing slightly. Of course. What's on your mind? Lyra took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for something difficult. You've saved me, she began, her voice catching just slightly. You've sacrificed something for me, and now I'm asking you to stay. Not just as a protector, but as someone who might help me change the course of my people's future. Jason's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Lyra's gaze was unwavering. I've been trained my entire life to rule, to lead my people. But I am not prepared for what comes next. The throne I'm meant to take is one built on old traditions, traditions that I don't agree with. And my people, they are divided. They need someone who can help me, someone who can see beyond the old ways. I can't do this alone. Jason looked at her, unsure of what to say. You're asking me to stay with you? Lyra nodded, her expression softening. I am. But not just as a bodyguard. As someone who can guide me, someone who can see the path ahead when I cannot. Jason's mind raced. He had no experience with politics, no experience with ruling, but he knew one thing for sure: Lyra wasn't asking for something trivial. She was asking for his trust, and in return, she was offering him something he hadn't expected, a place in the future she was trying to build. I don't know how much help I can be, Jason said honestly, his voice low. I'm just a soldier. I'm not a leader. Lyra's gaze softened. Sometimes, Jason, the greatest leaders aren't those who are born to rule. They're the ones who are willing to fight for what's right. You've already proven that. You fought for me when it would have been easier to walk away. That's the kind of person I need. Jason didn't know what to say. The weight of her words settled heavily in his chest, and for the first time since he had stepped onto the shuttle, he realized just how far this journey could go. I can't promise I'll have all the answers, he said finally. But I'll stay. I'll help you. I'll help however I can. Lyra's expression brightened, though there was still an underlying sadness in her eyes. Thank you, Jason. I don't know what the future holds, but with you by my side, I think we can face it. Jason nodded, his resolve hardening. He didn't know what was ahead of them, but he was done running from it. They would face it together, whatever it was. The shuttle drifted on, silent and steady, as the two of them prepared for the unknown future that awaited them. Jason stared out the small window of the shuttle, watching as the stars streaked by in their slow, endless dance. He had agreed to stay, to help Lyra navigate the uncertain path ahead, but as the days passed, he began to feel the weight of that decision. The quiet hum of the shuttle's engines had become a constant presence, like a heartbeat, as if reminding him of the responsibility he had taken on. Lyra, on the other hand, seemed to be finding her strength again, the color slowly returning to her face as her health improved. Still, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than what she had told him. Her people, the ones who had claimed his frozen hands as a tribute, were still out there, waiting for their next move. He couldn't ignore the fact that Lyra was the heir to a powerful throne, and her people would expect her to return, to take her place among them. But would they accept her, or would they see her as weak for relying on a human to guide her? Jason wasn't sure, but the thought nagged at him. He had never been part of any political struggle, never been a part of something this vast. He had always been just a soldier, a man with a simple job to do. And now, he found himself caught up in the fate of an entire civilization. As the shuttle glided through the silent void, Jason turned to Lyra, who was seated across from him, her eyes lost in thought. What happens next? Jason asked, his voice low. Lyra looked up, her silver eyes meeting his, and for the first time in days, there was a glimmer of resolve in them. Next, she echoed, as if the question hadn't fully registered with her. I have to return to my people, she said slowly. I can't run from my destiny, no matter how much I wish I could. Jason nodded, though his heart sank at the thought. He had known this moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier. Do you think they'll accept you? He asked, trying to sound casual, though he couldn't help the edge of concern in his voice. Lyra hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the stars outside the window. I don't know, she admitted. I've spent my entire life preparing for this. But now, I'm not sure if I'm ready. Jason studied her, his thoughts racing. He had seen her strength, her determination. But he had also seen her vulnerability, the uncertainty that lingered just beneath the surface. She wasn't ready to take the throne, not yet. And Jason wasn't sure how much longer he could be the one to guide her. I'll stay with you, he said suddenly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Lyra looked at him, surprise flickering in her eyes. You don't have to, she said softly. You've already done more than I could ever ask for. Jason shook his head. I know, he said, his voice steady. But I'm not going to leave you to face this alone. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Lyra's eyes softened, and for a moment, Jason saw something in them that resembled trust. Thank you, she whispered. The words felt heavier than any weapon Jason had ever carried. They held the weight of everything that was yet to come. Lyra had a long road ahead of her, and so did Jason. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he was beginning to feel like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The shuttle drifted through the stars, silent and steady, as the two of them prepared for the journey that awaited them. The galaxy was vast, full of unknowns, but Jason knew one thing for sure: whatever happened, he would be there for Lyra, as her protector, her ally, and maybe, just maybe, her friend. The shuttle drifted through the dark expanse of space, a small speck among the endless stars. Jason sat quietly in the cockpit, staring at the distant pinpricks of light. They had been traveling for days, moving toward the rendezvous point Lyra had insisted on. She had remained mostly silent since their conversation, lost in her own thoughts, but Jason knew that beneath her calm exterior, a storm was brewing. She was preparing herself for something monumental, something that neither of them could fully understand yet. They were heading toward the heart of her people's territory, a place where she would have to confront her destiny. Jason had never been one for grand destinies. He was a soldier, trained to follow orders and do his job. But this? This was different. This was not just about survival, it was about helping someone who wasn't just fighting for her life, but for the future of an entire civilization. He didn't know if he was ready for what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't walk away now. He looked over at Lyra, who was seated in the back of the shuttle, her silver eyes fixed on the stars outside the small window. She had changed in the time they'd spent together. There was a quiet strength about her now, a determination that hadn't been there when they first met. Jason had seen it in the way she carried herself, in the way she refused to let the weight of her people's expectations crush her. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a leader, though she hadn't fully embraced that role yet. "Lyra," Jason said, his voice breaking the silence. She turned to him, her expression calm but distant. "We're almost there," he continued, trying to sound reassuring. "Are you ready?" Lyra paused, her eyes searching his face for a moment before she nodded slowly. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready. But I don't have a choice." Jason leaned back in his seat, letting out a quiet breath. "You'll figure it out," he said. "You've already shown me that you're stronger than you think." She smiled faintly, though the sadness in her eyes lingered. "Maybe," she said softly. "But I don't have all the answers. And I'm afraid of what happens if I make the wrong choice." Jason didn't know how to respond. He had no answers for her, no wisdom to offer. But he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. "You don't have to do this alone," he said simply. Lyra's gaze softened, and for a moment, Jason could see the relief in her eyes. It was a fleeting expression, but it was enough. "Thank you," she said quietly. They continued on in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Jason's mind wandered back to the time before all of this. Before Lyra, before the alien world, before the uncertainty of what was to come. He had been a man with a simple life, a life that had now been turned upside down. And yet, as he sat there, watching the stars pass by, he realized that he had never felt more alive. They were nearing the rendezvous point, a small planet that Lyra had described as a neutral ground for her people. Jason didn't know what would happen when they arrived, but he knew that whatever it was, it would change everything. The future wasn't something that could be predicted. It was something that was forged in moments like this, when two people, from entirely different worlds, chose to face the unknown together. The shuttle's descent into the atmosphere of the neutral planet was smooth but filled with tension. Jason sat in the cockpit, his fingers tapping lightly on the controls, his mind racing. Lyra sat silently beside him, her eyes fixed on the planet below. It was an odd sensation, this feeling of being so close to a new world, yet knowing that the moment they landed, everything would change. There was no turning back from this. They had made the choice to come here, and now, they would have to face whatever came next. The planet was beautiful in its own right: lush green valleys, towering mountains, and vast oceans stretching beyond the horizon. It was peaceful, a place of neutrality, where different factions could meet and discuss matters without the threat of war hanging over their heads. It was the perfect setting for the challenge Lyra was about to face, but Jason could tell she was still unsure. As the shuttle touched down on the soft ground, the low hum of the engines finally ceased, and an eerie silence filled the cabin. Lyra took a deep breath, straightening up in her seat, her eyes narrowing as she looked out the window at the landscape that lay ahead. Jason followed her gaze, unsure of what to say. "We're here," he said, his voice calm but tinged with the weight of the moment. Lyra didn't respond immediately, her expression unreadable. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke. "I've never been more afraid in my life," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jason turned to face her, his gaze steady. "You don't have to be afraid," he said. "I'm with you. And I'm not going anywhere." Lyra's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of gratitude in her gaze. She nodded slowly. "Thank you, Jason. I don't know what I would do without you." Jason gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You're not alone," he said again. "We're in this together." As the hatch opened and the cool breeze from the outside world rushed in, they both stood up and exited the shuttle. The ground beneath their feet felt solid, yet there was an unsettling quiet about the place. They walked together, side by side, through the clearing and toward the meeting grounds where Lyra's people were waiting. Jason couldn't help but notice the way Lyra carried herself. There was a newfound confidence in her steps, though it was still laced with uncertainty. She was determined, but Jason knew the weight of her past and the expectations placed on her. This was her moment to prove herself, not just to her people but to herself. They reached the clearing, and Jason stood back as Lyra stepped forward to face the gathering. The people around them, all alien in appearance with their vibrant skin colors and varying forms, watched her with anticipation. Jason felt like an outsider, but he didn't mind. He had chosen to be here, and he would stay by her side no matter what. Lyra raised her chin, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "I have come to make a choice," she said, her words carrying the weight of her resolve. "And I choose to forge a new path, one where my people can grow, where we can evolve beyond our old ways." The crowd remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I am not the ruler you were expecting. I am not the princess who will sit idly by and follow the rules of our ancestors. I am the leader who will challenge them, who will stand for what is right, even if it means changing everything." Jason stood off to the side, watching as Lyra spoke. He could feel the power in her words, the strength that had grown within her since they had first met. She was no longer just the frightened girl he had saved from the storm. She was something more, someone who could lead, who could change the future. As she finished speaking, the crowd remained silent for a long moment, the air thick with tension. Then, one by one, they began to kneel. It was a sign of respect, of acceptance. Lyra had done it. She had taken the first step toward her destiny. Jason couldn't help but smile, pride swelling in his chest. This was only the beginning. Together, they would face whatever challenges came next, knowing that the future was now in their hands. The crowd's silence lingered long after Lyra finished speaking, and for a moment, it felt like the weight of an entire world was pressing down on her shoulders. Jason watched from the edge of the clearing, his arms crossed as he observed her transformation from a princess caught in the expectations of her people to a leader defining her own path. She had spoken with such conviction, and now, as the kneeling figures before her slowly stood, Jason could see the shift. She had earned their respect, but more importantly, she had earned her own. The air around them seemed to vibrate with the tension of that moment. The alien assembly, with their vibrant skin and strange features, stood in awe. They were looking at Lyra, not as a girl caught between her royal duty and personal desires, but as the woman who would lead them into a new era. The ripple of acceptance was palpable. Jason could see it in the way they regarded her now, no longer just a symbol of their old traditions but the embodiment of something new, something stronger. Lyra met their eyes with unwavering certainty, and though she had not yet fully embraced her role, it was clear that this was the beginning of a profound shift. The silence broke as one of the leaders stepped forward, his skin a deep shade of violet, eyes wide with a mix of admiration and curiosity. He bowed his head slightly, a sign of respect, before speaking. "You have defied what we thought was inevitable, Princess Lyra," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We did not think change was possible, but you have shown us otherwise. Your strength, your vision, it is unlike anything we've seen before." Lyra did not flinch under his words, her gaze steady and resolute. It is not strength that defines me, she said, her voice carrying the weight of experience, but the willingness to take a step into the unknown, even when the path ahead is uncertain. Another leader, a female with pale blue skin and striking green eyes, stepped forward, her posture filled with deference. You are no longer just a princess to us, she said softly. You are our hope for the future. We will follow you, Lyra, wherever you choose to lead us. Jason could feel a sense of pride swelling in his chest. He had always known that Lyra was capable of this, of leading, of changing the course of her people's future, but seeing it unfold before him, seeing her command the respect of these powerful beings, was something he couldn't have imagined. She was no longer just the alien girl he had rescued in the storm. She was someone who could shape destinies. As the leaders of her people acknowledged her new role, Lyra turned to Jason, a soft, almost imperceptible smile crossing her face. I didn't do this alone, she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. You stood by me. And for that, I'll be forever grateful. Jason gave a small nod, his heart racing with a mixture of emotions, pride, fear, and an undeniable sense of belonging that he hadn't felt in a long time. We're in this together, he said, the words simple but filled with meaning. Lyra glanced back at the assembled leaders, her eyes meeting theirs with a quiet strength. Together, she repeated. The planet beneath their feet seemed to hum with the possibility of what was to come. A new chapter was beginning, not just for Lyra, but for them all. The future was no longer something to fear, it was something to build, together. The crowd, now silent, began to disperse, each member lost in their own thoughts about what they had just witnessed. Lyra turned back to Jason, her expression softened with a sense of finality. It's just the beginning, Jason, she said. But I think we've already taken the first step. Jason smiled, his resolve steady. And we'll keep going. As they walked away from the clearing, side by side, the future seemed a little less uncertain, a little more within their control. The stars above shimmered like distant promises, and for the first time, Jason felt ready to face whatever came next. Together.